I think, along those same lines, it's not quite pornography, but I think that what women tend to gravitate more towards is the self-objectification of themselves on the internet and, putting, I don't know what word to use. I'll just say it, slutty photos of themselves online.
Right.
Welcome to Awake at the Wheel. In this episode, we're going to be revisiting the topic of pornography. We've discussed it in previous episodes with regard to how it applies to and impacts relationships of adolescents. We've talked about it with young adults, but we're going to revisit it because it is something that is prevalent. It's in our society, it's in our world, and it's affecting our relationships. So we need to talk about it.
All right. And I think, as I said in a previous episode, experts really disagree. I'm going to put experts disagree on, why is porn good? Is it bad? Why is it bad if it is, and so on. So I want to kind of touch upon those issues because, as I said in the previous episode, I've watched a number of colleagues really have what I consider to be black and white debates on pornography. And I don't know how many of them are actual clinicians. Okay, but I know that when I talk to clinicians, they say, behind the scenes especially, they go, what these supposed experts are saying does not align with what I'm seeing in my clinical practice. Okay. And the biggest one is where they say there's no problem with porn. Pornography is not addictive. All right. Sex is not addictive. You can't, be addicted to masturbation, for example. Like they say this and they look at the most, let's say, specific definition of addiction and how the brain operates, when you're dealing with addictive substances or behaviors. And technically, they are correct that with pornography, we don't see the same types of brain activity that you do see with either substance or behavioral addictions. Well, the only official one, the DSM, is gambling. So it is different in that regard. But I don't care whether you use the term addiction, whether you use the term compulsive or problematic. If someone comes into my office and they say, I have an issue with porn, it's affecting myself, it's affecting my relationship, then it's an issue that should be dealt with. And nobody should, demean their experience or deny their experience. And so that's the first part I wanted to say. I don't know if you want to jump in with that before I keep rambling.
I just wanted to touch on, I love the distinction that you made between what clinicians and researchers see.
Yes.
And I don't know if that has come across in our various episodes, but I tend to focus a lot of what I say and my observations on, what we're actually seeing in the clinic and what we're seeing in our clinical work. Research is great and it's wonderful and helpful and helps guide our work. But really, when it comes to real day-to-day stuff, I think that it's so valuable for us to draw on those experiences.
Exactly. And, on the clinical side, let's say the negative is that if somebody doesn't know his or her own biases, their confirmation bias, whatever is going on, they can have a really skewed perspective on whatever topic it is. But on the other hand, in a clinical setting, we can have discussions, we can have revelations that you're not going to get in research. Some 18-year-old student answering a question online or something is very different from having an in-depth discussion. And one thing I know, sometimes I get in some clashes with my research colleagues, but when they talk about certain phenomena like dissociation, suppression, repression, trauma, and they talk about the research doesn't support A, B, or C. Well, you're not allowed to do things in laboratories that would cause these types of phenomena like dissociation. Right. So what are you really looking at? You're looking at, analogs of the phenomenon. That's not the same thing. So sometimes that's a clash. That's where you get different views. People who really see it versus those, again, who are just doing research. And on the flip side, those doing research say, well, but the clinicians, they already have their belief of what they're seeing, and they may be, interpreting a certain way. They may be leading the client in a certain direction. So I just want to say, these caveats notwithstanding, okay, we're going to have a discussion about all of this, and we're going to bring both the research and the clinical into the discussion. So before I jump in, again, before I keep rambling, I'll throw back to you.
Yeah. So in our previous episode where we talked about pornography and adolescents and their exposure to it, we did talk about a number of different sex differences. boys and girls interpret things differently. Their neurology is different. There's many similarities, but there's also many differences. Oftentimes, pornography is targeted to males, and with that comes things like themes of aggression and themes of sexual violence in pornography, which does frankly cater to their testosterone driven desires. So I don't think that that's by accident. I don't think that that's a mistake. I think that these creators are quite aware of that fact. And that's not to say that women don't consume pornography or engage in pornography, but it is typically directed at males.
Right. It's for males, by males, right? And so, and that's why, and there are female directors. I know some, female porn directors, and there are genres that are supposed to be more either realistic or, catering to different types of people and so on, body types and everything. But those are niche markets. They're not nearly as prevalent as everything else that you're going to see when you go to Pornhub or YouPorn or anything like that. You're going to see like they comprise a tiny portion of the market. Right. So we have to understand that, again, it is being done by males for the male pleasure. And even if a woman's receiving pleasure in those types of videos, it's usually performative. It's not, it doesn't align with how women normally experience pleasure and so on. But the women are seeing this, and this becomes part of their sexual script. They, whether consciously or unconsciously, they're following along with what they see. And we talked about this in a previous episode. We should always say, we're going to be talking mostly, about male and female, sex relations. But that's just because A, that's the majority, and B, if we took a break each time and said, well, male, female, then it gets a bit unwieldy. So,
But to that point, would you not agree that, again, back to the biological differences, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual sex, men are men and women are women. So there's going to be commonality in heterosexual and homosexual relationships with regard to, appetite and arousal and consumption of porn and so on.
Oh, for sure. What I'm saying is, because I'm going to say like the man and the woman, I'll be using he, she, right? But to your point, yes, these things can apply as well to, male or female dynamics, especially if you have like with two men, you have a top and a bottom, right? You have the more masculine and feminine, or dominant, submissive. Right. So yes. And we can see the same thing play out, whether it is male or female. If it's about the dynamic, the aggression, the submission, and so on.
Yeah, and I suppose, I guess the point that I'm making there is it's so interesting that even though there are these biological differences and similarities, societally, socially, psychologically, these scripts are created with regard to sex and so on. So it's really an interesting, I guess, dichotomy. We can look at it with the biology and how it interacts with the psychosocial factors.
Right. Sometimes they align, oftentimes they clash. And as we were saying in the previous episode, women for many years since the sexual revolution, and I'll say it each episode, this is not coming from some old, conservative, narrow-minded thinker. I was raised in a sex store that was opened by my mother. Okay, so it's a female role model, and I have 3 daughters. So I am very open-minded and very knowledgeable on these different dynamics and phenomena. So, again, as we said last time or previous time, facts are facts, science is science, evolution is evolution.
Yeah.
So, all right. Yeah. So when it comes to, let's say, with pornography, so the biggest discrepancy is whether between the experts and so on is a couple of them. One is it addictive? And 2 is it harmful? And if it is harmful, what makes it harmful? So let's look at the addiction part. So as I said earlier, yes, technically speaking, it doesn't show the same signs that we see with addictions. Okay. But the research, let's just say it's still somewhat new. Still some small sample size many times if you want to use brain imaging studies. And anytime you do any brain imaging study, people have to recognize it's as much art as it is science. I mean, I'm exaggerating. There is a lot of science to it, but it's not like we're picking up every tiny little thing that's going on here. We're seeing patterns. We're making interpretations of those patterns, and they're getting more refined as the technology gets refined. But just because a certain area of the brain lights up in these cases and not these cases, what exactly does it mean? And even if we know neurologically, here's what's happening. How is the person psychologically experiencing it, right?
Yes.
So these studies are not perfect by any means. So anyone who wants to crap all over something I say, feel free. I'm not going to, I'll say, again, this is not set in stone. Okay, so there was a what do I call him? He was an educator. He passed away a couple of years ago, and his first name I believe is Gary. I'm blanking on the last name. I feel terrible. This happens to my name. It'll come up afterward. Okay, and he did these videos that were put on a website that was called rebootnation.org. Gabe, I forget the last name, but Gabe was a young man who he found in his early 20s. He was a young, healthy man. He had a beautiful girlfriend, and he found that he wasn't able to get erect. He was having erectile dysfunction. And he found that a lot of other young men were having the same problem. Again, early 20s. We had never seen this before in these numbers. I'll ask you, Malini, in the old days, and you actually alluded to this in a previous episode, in the old days, if I'm talking to, let's say, an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old guy, what was his number one concern when it came to sex?
Satisfying their urge.
Okay, sure. And yes, that's for sure. Okay. And let's say his number one, that's actually true. So what was his number one, let's say, anxiety or complaint about in the process of satisfying his urge? Assuming that he's able to get a partner, what was his concern?
Premature ejaculation.
Exactly. I mean, that was just number one. And if you look at the ads, I love some of the ads, anywhere between 25 and 75% of men. Well, okay, that's right. Sure. Okay. What are the actual rates? It's hard to know. How do you define it and so on? But the point was, yes, premature ejaculation. Now, so many young men can't even finish, right? Whether because of their having been habituated to porn. Okay. And again, whether it's neurological or psychological, doesn't matter. They're having the same issue. So they're not able to finish. Or they can't get hard, or they can't stay hard, or they can't stay as hard as they would like, or their partner would like, right? These are the kind of problems we're seeing. The premature ejaculation still exists, but it's not. I'm seeing far more cases of these other issues that were never the case with young, healthy men, right? So, and people can talk about antidepressants and other, neurotropic medications are, they're, let's say, exacerbating the problem. Right, healthy diet,
but they're not causing it.
Yeah, not necessarily causing. I mean, for some people, it could cause it. Like right?
For some,
antidepressants SSRIs can either kill the sex drive, or you still have the sex drive, but you're not able to finish. Okay, so these things are true, and more and more people are having it. But when I talk to the men who are having these problems, not all of these men are on SSRIs. So it's that unhealthy diets we know can be causing these problems as well. More use of cocaine and so on can cause problems, or MDMA. So all of these are factors that could do it. But again, I try to rule all these out with a lot of these men, and I find out that's not the cause for many of them. It really comes down to an unhealthy relationship with pornography. Okay, so again, not being able to finish, not getting hard, and so on. In any event, Gabe Deem was his last name, on rebootnation.org. He had some videos by Gary Wilson, Wilson's his last name, that talked about the effects of pornography on the brain. Now, these were some old videos. They were done, they looked cheap. He sounded even cheaper. Like, it really sounded not very credible, and it didn't look very good. But he cited research that was credible. And he made a couple of mistakes with some of his terminology. And this was back in the days where not many people knew that dopamine is not about pleasure. It's about reward. It's a reward system, not pleasure. So he made some mistakes in that regard. And there's allegations that he held himself out to be, have higher credentials than he really had. I haven't seen evidence for that. Okay, or not good evidence for that. All right. So there are people who criticize him and his work. He did pass away a couple of years ago. Okay. But I've seen a lot of his work, and I saw the videos, and I played them to my students, and I thought they were really powerful. Some of them were really effective in showing, theoretically at least, and it seems like there's science behind it, what happens to the brain when young, and it's mostly males, okay, when young virgin males are exposed to pornography excessively. So it's not the exposure per se. It's not just like one or two times seeing it. It's seeing it over and over and over again. Okay. And what he showed, I don't want to give him the whole talk, but he pretty much argued. And again, there is some research that supports this. Some people, criticize the research. Any neurological research, or brain imaging studies, we have to take with a bit of a grain of salt, right? But we need much, much more replication. But the idea was that these young virginal males, and he uses analogs with rats or with mice. Okay. So he shows the same thing with mice, that if they, I'm going to do the mouse one just because it's so compelling. It's just so amazing. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, Malini, what do you think? What one thing in the environment will scare mice more than anything else in the world? Or what sense gets triggered that would make a mouse go, holy mackerel, I got to get out of here?
I would say their sense of smell.
Very good. And what smell? And it's not cats. Okay, it's not any of those predators. There's one smell that makes a mouse go, "That's it, I'm out of here." Any idea?
Fire.
Fire? Not bad. Okay, it's death.
Yeah.
The smell of death. Okay.
The smell of death.
Yeah, another mouse's death, though. It's another mouse, right? Which makes sense, right? If a mouse isn't triggered by that and goes, okay, well, this is a pretty fun place, even though it smells like death, they're going to get killed probably. So, right? So they're so adverse to the smell of death, of their own death. So researchers formulated a synthetic version of this called cadaverine, and they basically sprayed it on female mice in estrus, in heat. Okay. And they placed the virginal males with them. Now, if it wasn't a virgin, it was a different effect. So with virgins, and if I get any of the studies wrong, and Gary Wilson didn't do the study. He just talked about, I think it was Jim Faust who did the studies. I don't want to give credit to the wrong person. I'm pretty sure it was researcher Jim Faust, PFAUS. So what they said was, and again, if I get any of this wrong, I apologize. But they put the virginal male with the female who's in heat. And even though she smells of death, okay, she's in heat, he still is mating with her. Okay. So he'll mate. So he's becoming conditioned. He's able to overcome millions of years of evolution, right, to have sex if he's a virgin. Now, here's the amazing two things. If they then put later on, after he's become conditioned to associate the smell of death with sex and pleasure, okay, if they put a regular female in heat and the one smelling like death, in heat, it's a 50-50, right? You would think that normally you say, well, okay, I got a choice. I'm going for, the non-death smelling person, right? No, he's going for the grim
But their
reaper.
brains have made that connection.
Yeah, their brain makes that connection. Yeah. And even crazier is then they take the cadaverine and they spray it on like little wood logs. And the mouse, it's just a log. But because he's made that connection, he's not humping the log, but he's curling with it. He's getting close to, he's getting intimate with this little wooden, this wood basically. So that's how powerful hundreds of or millions of years of evolution can be wiped out with conditioning. So what he's arguing is that if young men are being conditioned, they're virginal males, and it's not like in the old days, almost every male or female, before they've actually had sexual intercourse, have had exposure to, magazines, videos, whatever. But never in the history of humanity have we had so much repetitive exposure. That's what he's saying. And it's novel. That's the big thing. If I'm watching the same porn 1,000 times, watch it, rewind in the old days, VHS and so on, over and over and over, the same one, because I have no variety or I only have 5 different tapes, right? I kind of become habituated to it. My sexual response gets lower each time. It's not the same. Novelty gets us going. So what he's arguing is that when you have young virginal males, having excessive repetition and novel, okay, so the dopamines always get surging. Remember, it's not the pleasure. The dopamine is about reward. It's orient and reward and chase after more of it. So he's saying that the novelty of porn and the ability to just, watch 10 seconds, go to another one, right? He's just saying that it's really, it's having an impact on the brain. It's not just Gary Wilson. A lot of people are saying this, right? It's having an impact on the brain that we've never seen in history. And so I'm not a neurologist, not a neuropsychologist. I don't know how credible these are, but I've seen a number of researchers make the same claims.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because, again, just in reading the literature, that we know that with males, whether it's mice or otherwise, that the parts of the brain that are engaged during arousal and sex are, the more primitive parts of the brain, the back of the brain, for example, and the amygdala and so on. Whereas with women, typically what is engaged more frequently is the prefrontal cortex. So it's really, really interesting to hear this description of the mice and the fact that they, they're not using their thinky parts of the brain. They're strictly looking at instinct and getting that satisfaction.
Right. And having that satisfaction, again, associated with something that would never be the case. Right.
Yeah.
And again, rewire them. And they say neurons that fire together, wire together. So that's how the conditioning happens. Right. So for the male humans, right, watching the porn, what they're being conditioned to is 2-dimensional porn. Right. And repetitive on the screen, whether it's a laptop or their phone, they're watching it. And so that's why, you said in a previous episode that a lot more young men today say, you know what, I'd just rather masturbate, than have intercourse, because that's what they become conditioned to. And that's where they derive more pleasure. They know exactly what they like, and they do it so often. Once again, in the past, guys would masturbate, sure. But again, it wasn't this exposure to all this different material. It was, whether it was reading something or seeing a few pictures, whatever, it's very different than when it's, it's what it is now. And who knows what's going to happen with AI or with sex dolls and everything like that. And VR is what I meant, VR as well. It's taking it to a different level. And who knows how much the brain is being changed. But some studies have shown, and again, small sample sizes, it's preliminary, but that they showed that when they looked at people who, and it's never porn viewers and non-porn viewers. You can't find non-porn viewers. Studies can't be done. Everyone's seen some porn, basically. So what they find is when, they look at degrees of porn watching. So guys who watch, let's say, a moderate level versus excessive level, whatever number or metric they're using, they've shown that, again, these are preliminary studies, that with the higher use men, they have less gray matter in their brain. Now, is it that dumber people are watching porn? And I can't remember. I know that they tried to rule this out with, structural equation modeling and so on. And they're basically trying to say it's not that dumber guys are watching porn, right? It's just that watching porn excessively somehow maybe is having some impact on the gray matter. It's not making people, incapable of functioning, but it is having some impact. Now I'm going to ask you a question. The other one, and I say this with a smile because I've had so many people, another finding that they see is that the decreases in gray matter, it's also correlated with, let's say, superior hand-eye coordination. Okay. So guys who are watching a lot of porn, A, they have less gray matter, but B, they also have better hand-eye coordination. So I'm going to ask you, how do you interpret that?
Well, oh gosh, you're going to make me say this out loud.
The funny thing is, whatever you say is the wrong answer. So I'm going to let you say it.
No, okay. You let me put my foot in my mouth and then tell me I'm wrong. I would presume that it has to do with the fact that the hand-eye coordination between masturbating and watching the pornography, right. There's a connection being made in the brain with that.
Right, and that's what most people think when they hear that connection. Okay, navigating, being able to use one hand to masturbate, the other to navigate through these different screens and everything like that. Right, another one to be on the phone, a foot to hold the door, whatever the case is. You would think that. But this is where correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, right? So the theory is that who do you think, if someone's watching a lot of porn, a young man watching a lot of porn, where is he and what is he also doing? The kind of young man who watches a lot of porn.
He's probably at home in his room or in the basement also playing video games.
Exactly. So that might just be a correlation, right? Yeah. So that's the hand-eye coordination part. So anyway, just a little passing twist there. Yeah. So, right. So in any event, yes.
But I want to actually pause you there because I think that is a large part of the problem at large is, this and again, we're tying this back to what we've spoken about with young men in the past and in previous episodes. But there's such a huge propensity and proportion of young males now that is their activity of choice, hang out in the basement, watch porn, play video games, don't interact with the real world. This is a real problem. There's problems, of course, that are going to take place in their brain and in their development, but also in their ability to socialize with real women and socialize with the world at large. It's killing their motivation. It's killing their drive to, again, be something, be somewhere, do something.
Right. And one of the big parts of killing it is if they're on headphones talking to other people on Discord or whatever else, they're being surrounded by a bunch of other men or young boys who are doing the same thing. So that's the norm. So they're all kind of dragging themselves down and they're hearing all these guys say, yeah, look, 99% of the women go for 1% of the guys. What chance do we have? And what chance do you have if you're sitting at home, not working on yourself, gaining weight, playing video games, not learning how to engage with women, not learning how to inoculate yourself against the humiliation of being rejected, turned down, whatever, right? Like it's getting harder and harder. So their progress is being delayed. And as we know, the longer you wait to do something, the harder it gets to finally do it. It's better to humiliate yourself and fail when you're younger than older.
And I think in part it's by some being promoted as like the new norm, and it's not something negative. I read the other day that John Mayer, the singer, reported to Rolling Stone magazine that he's like, I can't remember the word they used, but like the new age masturbator, meaning that this famous person, so you would assume that he'd be able to, have a lineup of women coming after him. I don't know. But he stated that he would rather be at home and masturbate to porn than go date real women. So I don't know if young people listen to his music, but here's this celebrity that is promoting this very thing as like, hey, it's a cool thing to do.
Right. And how sad, because, I'm going to use Charlie Sheen as the counter to John Mayer. And I pardon the language. Like, this is something he said that was, it's a bit sexist. Maybe some will find that. But years ago when, Charlie Sheen was on top of his game and they knew that he would go to, I think it was Heidi. I don't want to get the wrong Heidi. She had she basically ran an escort service. Okay. Heidi something. And so people are saying, Charlie Sheen, you're good looking, you're famous, you're rich. Why would you pay prostitutes for sex? And he says, I don't pay the women for sex. I pay them to leave. Okay, so, all right. So very different attitude today where it's John Mayer who could have anybody going, I'd rather just, right? So, and again, the whole thing about weight delaying, here's the whole thing. A couple of things with going back to pornography and the male-female differences. I've had so many young men who, they're in their early 20s, or late teens. And they're like, by the time, they're still virgins. So the older they get, it's more embarrassing for them. And they're terrified that, of course, the woman that they're going to find is going to have had, far more experience than them. So they're intimidated as hell. In the old days, it's just like, okay, maybe it's an embarrassing experience. Maybe it's not pleasurable for her, whatever. But today, the reality is they risk being shamed, because that's one of the differences now. Women, not everybody, but far more young women have no problem going online and totally humiliating somebody. Now, if someone did something really wrong and you're trying to get justice or vengeance, fine. But if this is someone who just happened to be hapless, he didn't do a great job, he wasn't a jerk or anything like that, and you're going to shame him or humiliate him, and it happens enough times that the men are terrified it could happen to them, right? And again, the longer they wait, they know they're falling down the ladder. It's much harder for them to climb up that ladder and say, I'm going to take a chance and, try to get in the game. So it's getting harder and harder. And by the way, one of the changes you asked me about, changes, maybe, I don't know if this episode or another one, over the years, one of the changes in the old days, all the research showed this. Every single study showed men are going to inflate the numbers. On average, most men will, and most women will deflate the numbers, whether it's how many people you've had or how early you've had sex, okay, or what you call sex. All right. Like men are more likely to say it's smaller numbers, but they're far more likely to say that kissing is sex. Okay. It depends on how the question is worded. Okay. But they're more likely than women. Well, one of the changes is now that not only are women not necessarily hiding their count, but some of them are inflating. Like men, right? They want to have a higher kill count. So that's one of those changes. And that's not evolutionary. That's totally social.
Yeah. And I think, along those same lines, it's not quite pornography, but I think that what women tend to gravitate more towards is the self-objectification of themselves on the internet and, putting, I don't know what word to use. I'll just say it, slutty photos of themselves online. Right. And we spoke about this when we were discussing adolescence and sex. And I think this is true of young women as well. I wonder, let me backtrack. I would say that over the years, this has happened. This has been promoted and this has been encouraged. But I think that it is counter to what is innately true of women. I think that it's this propagation of freedom and sexual freedom and being empowered under the guise of they're doing this for men. They're doing this for men's pleasure. It's not actually for them.
Right. And I forgot the guy's name now. This one name I don't need to know. The guy who started Girls Gone Wild. Okay, we won't get into him, but so many young women thought, and I used to say this in my class, again, one of these changes I saw happening in front of my own eyes. It's like they think that it's sexually empowering to lift up a t-shirt and show their breasts. Okay. And what do they get in exchange? They get sometimes a t-shirt that says Girls Gone Wild. And the guy makes millions of dollars off of your body. Oh, that's really empowering to exploit.
So what did you really get?
It's exploitative. But again, the narrative was, no, you're empowering. And when, again, and I said this in the previous episode and one before that, which is when young people are exposed to things at an age that they're not ready to process it, they can't do it. Whatever you do, it's so much easier to sell them a lie. And so many young people are being sold this lie that is empowering and so on. And no, it's not. It's exploitative, or at the very least, it's not satisfying. And, we've talked about these, about how people are suppressing their needs, their desires, their own wants, because, for whatever reason, like whether they don't want to be seen as a prude, or they don't want to upset the other person, or they, whatever the case may be, right? That's not empowering. So,
no. Back
to the porn. Ready? Well, here we go. Okay.
Ready.
So this is something. Okay, this is something that research has pretty consistently shown. I think it's one of those findings where it's quite clear. Okay, when they look at people where they do suggest that there is some correlation between watching porn and sexual problems. Okay, there are two factors that seem to kind of mediate this relationship. Okay, which or moderate it, which is basically, okay. So it's not necessarily that porn itself causes the problem. It's porn interacting with something. There's another factor there that leads to the problem. So there's two answers to this. What do you think is the number one thing when we look at men, in particular men, women as well, but men, what is that factor that if they don't have this, then porn is not necessarily a problem?
Give me a hint.
It's a sentiment, a feeling.
I was going to say something along the lines of self-esteem or feeling, like they are sexually competent.
Okay. That's not necessarily, it's probably correlated to some degree. Okay. I'm sure it is. It's almost like it's like a feedback loop, right? But the sentiment is shame.
Oh,
okay. So if someone has a shameful relationship with porn, if they think it's wrong or something like that, they're the ones who are more likely. And again, as always, we're not saying it's every single person, but the research shows that that's a common trend. So the ones who have some shame around pornography, around sex and so on. And what factor do you think, if I know something about you, I can predict very well that you would have an unhealthy or shameful relationship with pornography and sex or masturbation?
I would say it comes from childhood and the way that sex was approached in the household.
Okay, and what factor is common among? It's recently shrinking, but what is the factor in the household that would I could say, oh, I know that this is something about you, so therefore you probably have a bad, unhealthy relationship with sex. It's promoted in your household, not mine.
I don't know.
Yeah, she says I'm a heathen. That's okay. Religion.
Gotcha. Yep. I'm like, what's promoted in my household?
Yeah, it's okay. So again, the researchers, they're correct that people they're more likely to be religious. But again, with my clients, my patients, many of them are not religious. It's not about the religion. Do they have an unhealthy, shame-based relationship with sex and porn or whatever? Yes, but not everybody. Okay, but that's what they point to and saying it's all about the shame. So we need to make them feel not shame and so on. But if we're looking at porn and the messages it conveys to people, where again, a woman is being subjugated or she's being dominated, humiliated or whatever, how do you not somehow consciously or unconsciously connect that to shame? Right.
Yeah, and if I can add something about religion, because I don't want anyone jumping all over you about that one, I think what you mean here is it's not about religion in and of itself or the teachings in and of themselves, but it's the rigidity that comes along with being in a religious household, and the rules surrounding certain things.
And the fact that you don't talk about these things in many cases, it's just right. Yeah. Just the sex talk is simply don't do it. Right, like that's right, and it's not all religious households, but it's more the more extreme ones, the more conservative or rigid ones. So yes, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, because it's not religion per se, right? But once again, I don't care if it's religion or not. I have many patients who come in, and yes, they do feel shame. And now the shame is, it's also society based, it's culture, not about porn per se, but about just themselves. Many young men, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, they feel worthless, demonized, useless. Okay, they know once again that if they're on that 1%, a lot of women are going to look down on them. There was a video going around not that long ago where they asked women, "What do you want in a man?" Okay, and they gave like a certain height, salary range. I forget what it was as well, like maybe body type and everything. They said all these things, and the guy said, "Well," and they did the math. They go, "Statistically speaking, you're looking for like 1% of the population or something like that, right?"
Yeah.
So when young men hear this, it's disempowering, it's demotivating. It makes them feel I don't have a chance. So sure, if I can convince myself that just watching porn and masturbating, and it's much easier, I don't have to spend a lot of money, I don't have to go on 100 dates with the chance of maybe one of those women going home with me and stuff like that. It's an easy way to talk yourself out of getting into the dating world. And we've talked a bit about the dating world, that it's a nightmare out there. It is a mess, and nothing we're saying should be misconstrued as minimizing what people are going through or denigrating them anyway. This is all being done said empathetically.
But what I'll say is, what a shame that doesn't motivate men to do better and be better. And, not everyone's going to meet this unrealistic expectation, but I would hope that for some, it's like, well, I better get my shit together and be an attractive mate. But instead, we're seeing this demotivation and all of the things that we've been talking about today. I read a few weeks ago about this woman who went on a date with a man, and she didn't know what to do because they had a great time. He seemed like a great person, but he was unshowered and smelled and ungroomed on a first date. And this is one of many examples, I'm sure. And I'm sort of veering from the topic, but since we're talking about it, it's really interesting. So, as you know, my family and I, we have a lot of, discussions about all kinds of things in society. We talk about sexuality, we talk about it all. So I asked my son, I said, well, being a 12-year-old boy, what do you think about this? Like, why are people showing up to dates like this and they don't care and they're unmotivated? I'm curious about what your thoughts are on his take. His take was, we're living in a world where everybody is a special snowflake, and they're told that you don't have to be better. You are perfect just the way you are. So these boys grow up into men and think that that's still true.
That's, first of all, for a 12-year-old boy, that's a great insight. Okay. And I think there's a lot of merit to it. I really do. I think the other part, though, is also it's self-handicapping, right? If I don't really try that hard, then hey, if it doesn't go well, I can just say, well, if I tried harder, I didn't know who this person was. She doesn't deserve the best of me. But if I know that if I really dressed up and everything, but on a first date, why am I going to waste all my time and everything? So they can lie to themselves as well. Also, a couple of things. One, I'll tell you right now, back in some, in older player days, okay, like there are books on, on being a player, they were saying that that's actually, if you do show up this way, like you're signaling, saying, you know what, I don't give a heck, I don't care about societal rules and everything. I'm a rebel. And so I think that message got perverted and twisted, where a person just comes up smelly and doesn't realize that that's actually repulsive. It's not going to attract a person. Right. So some of the messaging, and that happens all the time, and especially when you have people like Andrew Tate, and we've talked about him before, or MGTOW, men going their own way. The people are hearing this message. They don't have enough savvy or wherewithal to be able to hear what's really being said and to distill the good information from the crap and say, oh, this could really help. They're just getting a stew of misinformation with information, and they're just they're manifesting it poorly and ineffectively. So, I think.
And it's crazy to draw that back to porn, and then their brains are literally changing from the excessive consumption of this stuff, right? So I feel bad for young men, frankly, because, look at what a mess it is out there.
Yeah, it is. And again, for young women as well, it's, right? Yeah. It's a nightmare for everybody. And it's funny because when I ask, I've heard so many men and women each say that the other sex has it so much easier in the dating world. Okay, well, someone's wrong here. So, or we say, yeah, it's a nightmare for everybody.
So, porn, what do we do about this? I don't even know where to go with this as far as what my take is. I would say that one of the biggest things that people can do is be mindful of their consumption with the knowledge that, excessive consumption of anything, but, within the context of relationships and sex and, future relationship goals, too much is, it's really going to do a number on you. So be very mindful of your consumption. Also, be mindful of the fact that what you're seeing, these are actors. This is not realistic. This is not real life. So, be aware of that as well.
Okay. And the part about not real life, actually, I'm going to take it a next step. In the old days, okay, so if I can just add a couple more layers. In the old days, guys knew, on average, women either didn't watch porn or were less likely to watch porn, okay, or if they did, they wouldn't admit it. So, all right. So they didn't feel that they were being compared to, unrealistic ideals. The women knew that they can't live up to these ideals, but the men didn't have that anxiety. And so now, not only do they know that women have watched a lot of porn, okay, so they see a lot of performance, body sizes, shapes, lengths, and girth, and so on. So a couple of things. One, now, over the years, you asked me about changes over the years. Well, one of the changes is that males are about as anxious and neurotic and scared about sex as women are. Congratulations, we've hit equity or parity, okay? Right? Seriously, in the old days, every study showed that women were far more fearful, anxious, neurotic, etc. No, males are just as much so. And one of the reasons is because they feel the competition. Second, if it was just an actor, if it was all just, professional porn stars, then they could easily say, look, these are experts, right? You don't expect me to drive like a stunt driver, do you? Right? They're professionals. But because so much of the porn online is amateurs, self-made porn and so on, then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm being compared to real people. These guys who have these body types and can last forever or do all these things. So it causes so much anxiety. And we know that anxiety is the number one inhibitor of good performance or of any performance, right? Or pleasure. So these are some huge changes that have happened over the years. Okay. And now more than ever before, and I don't know if I said this before, but I'm just going to quickly just kind of weave this in. Okay. So more than ever before are women, or young, girls, women likely to basically say to a guy, their displeasure. We talked in previous podcasts that women are less likely to say so. So I'm not saying that all women are doing it, but previously I had not heard so many men telling me that they had either a friends with benefit or an actual girlfriend or a long-term partner who had told them, if you don't satisfy me again, like basically he wasn't able to perform, either couldn't finish or, couldn't get hard, couldn't stay hard or stay as hard as he or she wanted. She would basically give him an ultimatum. Next time this happens, we're done. I've had so many young men over the last 10 years say that. And I say to them, I've sometimes had them bring the partner in. I talk to them, I go, you know what you're doing? You're causing anxiety. And anxiety, you're basically guaranteeing that he's not going to be able to perform. And so
you're perpetuating the problem.
You're perpetuating the problem, exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's other ways to please. There's orals, like all these other stuff. And I've worked with many, many individuals and couples, trying to help them to deal with these problems. And you need healthy communication. You need alternative means of satisfaction. And each of you has to know that if it doesn't go the way you're hoping or expecting this time, there's other ways to please each other. And if you're okay with that, and there's no either overt or underlying tension, hostility, resentment, or anything like that, or threats or anything like that, then next time or the time after that, you'll get back on course and everything will be fine. Unfortunately, in so many relationships today, that's not happening. There is the tension, the threat, etc. And now more than ever before, the guy knows, well, especially if they're not exclusive, well, she's going to find somebody else who can satisfy her. And so there's such a harshness. And I've had female students and patients say, that's just empowerment. I said, no, it's not. Empowerment is you get what you want. And if you're shaming this guy, belittling him, threatening him, and he can't perform, well, you're not getting what you want, unless what you want is to, humiliate this guy or to get rid of him or to break his soul. I said, if that's what you're trying to do, kudos, you did a great job.
Yeah. And I think this all ties back to what we've spoken about before, as far as, the improper messages about sex, to young people. having these casual hookups and having these casual relationships and not actually, dating and getting to know each other, I feel in large part contributes to that type of attitude, because there isn't that same level of commitment to one's partner because they never learned how to do that.
Exactly. Okay. And I'll tell you right now, this was a number of years ago. Someone wrote about this. It was actually, I have seen the same thing, and I know others have written, but there was an article, I want to say 2018, maybe November, in the Atlantic, something about like why young people are having less sex, something like, or why millennials are having less sex, something like that. And again, I had been teaching about this for years before, because I'd seen it happen, where the sad thing when you talk about that, there are so many young women who would say, so we're putting all the poor men here. Now, how about poor women, where they say that they were hoping that somehow by having sex with this guy, okay, even though it's only sex, they're not having a relationship, it's just a hookup, and they've entered into this agreement, it's just a hookup, or it's just friends with benefits. You don't get to have feels, which, back to sex differences, males, we know for a fact, biologically, neurologically, it's far easier for them to have meaningless sex than it is for females. We know that for a fact. Not everybody, but on average, it's easier for males. So when you have friends with benefits where there's not supposed to be any feelings, someone's going to catch feels, okay? And in most cases, it's going to be the woman. That's just how you're wired, right? So these poor women, they think, well, I know I'm just going to have sex with him. He's going to come over. He's drunk. He's downtown. I happen to be nearby, and he doesn't want to pay for an Uber back home or something. So, they have sex at 3 a.m., drunken, sloppy sex. He goes to bed, passes out, whatever. Anyway, so these young women are saying that they're hoping that somehow that this sex that they're having with this guy will somehow show him some insights into who they are as a human being, and that he's going to fall in love with them. And it's like, no. And so many women say that somehow I'm going to seduce him or whatever. No, you're just another body that he's having sex with. That's it. And, and to think that that's somehow is going to make him like you more. No, it just means that he's got easy availability, easy access. That's it. Why would he have any deeper feelings for you?
But it's so crazy because, and I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate this, but it comes down to nobody knows how to communicate about their sexual needs in any type of relationship, whether it's a hookup, whether it's a long-term relationship, whatever the case may be. It's so weird because sex is so taboo, yet so ubiquitous in our culture. It's very, very bizarre. And it turns into this cognitive distortion of people think that the other should be able to read their mind, like in this example that you're giving.
Right. Yeah, that'll be a topic or a theme that cuts across a number of our episodes, this mind reading or these assumptions that we're all seeing the same thing or that they're playing by the same playbook. No, there is no playbook. Or actually, there's a billion playbooks out there and everyone's got their own, right? Yeah. And again, people say that relationships need more communication. It's not more communication. It's better communication.
Better. Yes, better quality communication. So I guess I'll add that to my list of what can we do about it. Talk about sex, talk about it more effectively and more clearly. So listeners, we want to hear your questions. We want to know what you think about this conversation. What are your questions about porn? What do you think about porn? Do you think it's helpful? Do you think it's harmful? Send us your questions, comment on this video. We'd love to hear what you think.
And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.